Good evening. Welcome to the Dwelling Place. This is Evangelist Doris J. Roberson, and we greet you in the name of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. We are so glad that you have joined us on tonight. And those that are joining right now, we welcome you from Facebook, and those that are joining from YouTube, and even those that will be listening to the replay. We are so grateful to be in another month, a month of March, almost a quarter of the month of the 2024. We are blessed of the Lord, and we have been talking this month about passing it on. And I am just so grateful for dynamic women that are just gifted and knowledgeable. We've had several women already passing on what God has invested in them and what they're trained to do. As you know, the month of March is Women's History Month. And we thank God for how God has designed women. And we are grateful tonight to be blessed with another dynamic woman of faith. And we are appreciative of her knowledge and wisdom. As you are joining, I want to invite you to invite one other person. You need to just tuck this information away at some point. As you elevate your lifestyle, you might want to refer back to this information that you received tonight. So I'm asking you to invite and share with one other person, because I tell you, Tiffany Jones is a woman of faith and a graduate of the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. I say that because, of course, we know that those that come from the amazing blue and yellow, they are definitely leave there qualified. And she went on to get her master's degree in accounting at the great University of Wayne State. And we're just blessed tonight to have this realtor to come and share with us. I'm going to, in a few minutes, just ask her to just briefly share any, just to whet your appetite and to introduce anything that I left out. And then I'm going to turn the screen over to her, and I'm going to come back at the end. But I want you, as you are preparing, get your pad of paper, and please feel free to ask questions in the chat. And again, I want you to definitely invite someone else to come along tonight. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to Tiffany Jones, Miss Tiffany Jones, who is a licensed realtor in the state of Michigan as well as Ohio. I will put her information on, and it'll scroll, so you will have her contact information. And if you desire to reach out to her, her information will be on the screen. At this time, Tiffany, greet our audience and whet their appetite. And I'm going to actually take myself off the screen.
Thank you so much, Evangelist Roberson, for having me on tonight. It's such a pleasure to join you again. I can't believe it's been a few years at this point, and God is truly blessing your ministry. And so I just appreciate you, as I always say, how God just placed you in my life. And I also want to thank everybody that's taking time to view. And of course, I just give God praise for the opportunity. And I say that because He is, I'm able to be here. And for that, I'm very, very grateful for that. So I'm super excited to just dive into the topic about buying and selling homes in this market in 2024. One thing that I will put out there is if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to put them in the chat, and we will leave time at the end for Q&A. So if you think you're going to forget your question, just drop it in the chat and we'll be sure to address it at the end. And so the first topic I'm going to talk about are just things that sellers should consider in this market. So you're thinking about selling your house. And so the first thing, and I'm going to talk about 6 different tips in regards to things you should consider in selling this in this particular market that we're in right now. And for most of the areas, and at least I'll definitely speak for Michigan and also Ohio, we are in a seller's market. And so what that means is that the inventory is lower than the demand. So we have not enough houses for all of the home buyers that are looking to purchase. So with that being said, it's also, and I'll talk about this later, some things that buyers should consider when shopping in this market. And so, as a seller, the first thing you should have, so number one, I'm going to say is a plan. And if you're thinking like, oh, okay, I want to make a move, the first thing you want to do is sit down and create a plan. One of the things that I always say to my sellers and potential sellers when I'm meeting with a potential client is, what is your plan? Where do you plan to go next? So if you're thinking about selling your home, do you plan to move out of state? Do you plan to stay local? Will you need time in the property after the sale? Each state is different. And so, if you are considering making this move and you want to have a deeper conversation and you need an agent, even though I'm licensed in Michigan and Ohio, I have a network of agents that I work with that can help you. So, a lot of the points, and I'll mention this as I go through my presentation, are going to be some of the things that are related to Michigan and Ohio. But overall, number one is you want to have a plan. You want to consider, where am I going to go to next? And will you need time in the property after closing? And so, as I mentioned, different states have different laws in regards to the seller and their occupancy. And so, with that, are you going to need time to make that transition? And with the things that I'm going to also mention later, it'll help you really kind of create a plan in regards to making that process as smooth as possible. So, if you're planning on purchasing another home after you sell your home, then you want to consider, at that point, what exactly do you want in your new home? So, are you going to keep the appliances in your current house, or do you want to take those with you? That's one thing that you want to consider. Depending on the house and your appliances, if you have very high end appliances, that could be very attractive in selling your house. So, these are the things that you want to do. I always recommend number two is just walk around your house and really take inventory on, are there things that you need to repair in the house? Are there the quirky little things that only you know about, right? Like the loose toilet, or, when you turn the water on, you have to tap it a few times. All of those little things are a checklist that you want to create and say, okay, am I willing to make some repairs? And I actually had this conversation yesterday. So, what I do as a homeowner is I actually each year I go through my house and say, what update am I going to make this year? What am I going to do? And depending on where you live, so Michigan and Ohio are four season states. So we have the winter, we have, spring, summer, and fall. Is depending on the time of year, there's certain repairs that you want to make. So, say for example, right now, as we're moving into the spring, this is the time that you may want to consider getting a quote on your roof, or, doing things like that. So, really consider as you walk around your home, are there updates or repairs that you need to make? And you also want to consider with that, if you're going to sell your home and purchase another house, is your sale of your house going to be contingent? Are you going to need to sell in order to purchase? So, is there a contingency where, in order for me to buy my new house, I need to make sure that I close on my current home because I'm going to use those proceeds? That is something else that you strongly want to consider. And at that point, as a seller, if you know you're going to be making that move, then you also want to make sure you get pre approved if you're not going to be paying cash for your next house. So sometimes I always recommend, if you have friends, family, someone you're going to possibly stay with in the interim, these are all the conversations that you want to start to have. So, as I mentioned, number two, walk around the house and consider any repairs or updates that you may want to make. And also at that point, if you're going to be financing and you're going to need a certain amount of money for your new home, then another thing to consider in that process is it going to be worth you making certain updates to your property? So, one thing I say, it's always a good idea to meet with the real estate agent earlier in the process. And what I usually do is help my sellers like navigate with, okay, I never think it's too early to start that if you know you're going to sell. So before you start spending a lot of money, meet with the agent and have them give you their professional opinion on what updates or things you should do considering your particular situation. And number three, and this would apply in any situation, is that once you've decided what you're going to do, where you're going to be moving to, and in addition to that, the repairs you're going to make, number three is to declutter. This is huge. So you want to have that garage sale, start giving things away, just do whatever you need to do, because one thing about it is that when you get ready to list your home on the market and you are showing off those awesome pictures, if it's a lot of furniture in some of the rooms, then some buyers really may not be able to see the space. Some people aren't creative where they can see past what they're looking at. So decluttering is going to be a huge benefit to you as a seller, and that'll be less stuff for you to move. And number four is going to be, hire a professional cleaner to come in and do a deep clean on the house. If things are a little dusty, a home always shows better when it's clean. So when I look at certain pictures and I say, wow, I see, clothes on the bed isn't made, things are kind of in disarray. Do you want to get top dollar for your home? Some sellers just need to sell now, right? And if you may be a person, you don't have time to make repairs, you just need to sell right away. So even if you can't afford to hire a professional cleaner, just tidying up to your best of your ability would be a great idea. So that would be number four. And some of these things may seem a little small, but they go a long way. Believe me when I tell you, when you start going and looking at properties, you will be amazed at some of the things that you'll see. So it's a good idea to make sure you show your house in the best light as possible. Number five is going to be, you know, anything will sell at the right price. And so that's something that you want to keep in mind. Everybody thinks their house is the best house on the block, right? Well, that's not always necessarily the case. So you want to consider, if you want to get top dollar for your house, and you may be a candidate, and the best candidate in your home may be the best candidate for having it staged, where a professional staging company comes in and they bring in furniture. And sometimes, depending on the home, it may really increase the desirability amongst buyers, and you may have multiple offers at that point. So staging may push you into a multiple offer situation. And again, your realtor will be able to help you navigate and say, okay, that would be a good scenario and a good situation where you should invest in staging. Another thing to consider is that when you want top dollar, some of those repairs may be necessary, right? And a few things, and I'll talk about this, will be my last point for my sellers. We'll talk about some of the upgrades and things that you should consider doing, when you want to get top dollar for your home. But when you want to get top dollar, you really want to focus in. So one thing I will mention, for example, when you have a house, in every area, there's an average price point. If your home is listed around the average price point in a particular area and it's listed at the right price, more than likely it's gonna go fast in this market. And so I'll say, for example, because I'm already noticing this in the Toledo area, and I actually didn't mention that. So I am, and I'm just bringing this up, but I'm licensed in Michigan and Ohio, as Evangelist Roberson mentioned, and I service the Metro Detroit area, and I also am licensed in Ohio, and I service the greater Metro Toledo area. And so I cover a very large area. And with that, in some markets, and depending on the city in which you're shopping in the state you live in, some areas are a little bit more desirable than others, but you'll have an average price point. So as a seller, one thing you want to consider is, when you're pricing your house, which your agent will help and, advise you on that process, is if your home is move-in ready, has those updates and bells and whistles, and it's around the average price point, more than likely it's going to probably sell faster. And so with that, you may want to consider doing some particular updates, or you may not, because you still may be able to get top dollar if you're in a very desirable area. And in addition to that, if you say, well, I don't really mind, if I get top dollar, I just want to get it sold in a certain amount of time. Then if time is something that's really important to you, you want to just make sure that your home is priced appropriately. And that's really going to be a big thing. And of course, the sooner the house sells, the more likely you are to get more money for the property, right? So if it's on the market and you're getting a lot of showings, you're getting a lot of interest, you're more than likely probably going to get an offer. And with that offer, I'm sorry, I should say you're probably going to get an offer, but if you're getting a lot of attraction, then you're probably, if you're in Toledo or in Michigan, in our scenarios right now, we're experiencing multiple offers. So if that is something that is important to you and you really want to make sure you have top dollar, then you want to do and consider some of those upgrades and, staging and those things that I mentioned. And another thing to think about with the upgrades, and that's point number 6, is just a few things that go a long way. A fresh coat of paint on the walls always goes a long way. So if you have the time and the resources, I strongly consider making sure that you paint the house. In addition to that, we already talked about the house being cleaned and decluttering. Updated kitchens, bathrooms, those are always a great thing. But if you're in a position and it doesn't really make sense for you to go in doing a 30, because it can get expensive, 30, 40, $50,000 complete rehabs to bathrooms and kitchens and things like that, consider updating the hardware. So replacing the lighting in the bathrooms, replacing your shower hangers and all of that kind of stuff where you hang your towels and your in addition to that, all of the different things in the bathrooms and kitchens as far as the hardware is concerned. Those really will go a long way. You may be able to also update the flooring. So in this particular market right now, you'll see a lot of, luxury vinyl plank floors. They're very easy to install, and it doesn't require the craftsmanship of getting other type of, tile and ceramic where there's more labor intensive work. So those are just some things to consider. If you can't do complete rehabs to your bathrooms, your kitchen, consider changing hardwares, lighting, the mirror, and then with painting, you'll be surprised. Don't hesitate to look at Google, Pinterest, all of those internet apps and things like that. Those are your best friends with really getting ideas. And then also when you talk with your realtor, they may be able to get you a discount on paint, certain things. So don't hesitate to ask those questions to make sure that you're really headed in the right direction. Another thing is lighting. Lighting is very important on the inside of your home and the outside. So now we have the daylight savings time, and with that, we're getting more sunlight and it's staying lighter out longer. But when it gets dark and your home is being shown, do you have the proper lighting outside? Can people see the address on the outside of your home when they pull up and they're trying to guess if it's your house? You want to make sure it's as easy as possible for a buyer to identify your property. Curb appeal is very important. You want to cut your grass. You want to make sure that you plow the snow. If you still have snow, you want to make sure you clear the ice so nobody falls when they're trying to get to the front door. Because if they fall outside, then more than likely they're going to think this may not be the house for me before they even walk in to see the beautiful job you did in the inside. So those are just a few things to consider. Security is a huge thing as well. Is the house secure? Are your doors secure? Are your locks working properly? Do you need to make sure your fence is repaired? All of these different things that some of them may seem a little small, but you want to just make sure that those things are just covered because you want to protect your investment. You don't want somebody to be able to easily get access to the home, and the repair, you need to make sure that your locks and things like that are working when someone tries to get access. So when an agent is trying to show the property to a particular buyer and they're wrestling with the door lock, that's not really a good thing. So remember, as a seller, if it's a repair and it's small to you, double or triple the price if the buyer has to fix it. So I just say that as a rule of thumb. It could be a $5 repair and then it turns into a $100 repair. If you know it needs to be fixed, fix it before you list it. And especially those smaller little quirky things, as I mentioned earlier, because it'll save you money. And one thing to consider, a buyer, when they walk in, if they start seeing a whole lot of small little things, they're going to start getting really, really picky as they go through the house. So those are just 6 things to consider for my sellers. So have your plan, walk around your home, and really consider repairs that may need to be made. Declutter. You want to make sure you clean up, and anything will sell at the right price. So make sure that you consider that, any updates you want to make, and then the upgrades that may be beneficial. And so those are just 6 things for your sellers, for my sellers. You want to consider that. And then if you're a buyer, so you're looking to purchase in this market, and especially for my first time home buyers, one thing I will say is that it's never too early to consider creating a plan. You say, I'm not in a position to buy this year. I know that I've already tried to get pre approved, or you just know there's a few things that you need to do to get ready. Make sure you lay out a plan and keep your stuff organized. And so, one thing I recommend that you do, because it's always important, write down your desires, write down what you want. Sometimes your wants may change. Write down your needs, because it's important and it will be helpful when you meet with the real estate agent to help really direct the conversation and also help them to deep dive and come to a quicker conclusion as far as certain areas that may have homes that they may know of that are coming to the market, or just certain things that'll be beneficial to you. So the first thing I would say, and I heard another colleague of mine say this, and I think it's key, is let your why be bigger than the interest rate. So, the interest rates are a big deal, right? So right now, interest rates are around like 6.75% or so. And that's like a 30-year mortgage. So interest rates are important. And we know that a few years ago, interest rates were 3%. But that's not the case. And it's very unlikely that we're going to see a market like that anytime soon. So considering where we are right now, interest rates are important because it does affect your monthly payment. However, let your why and why you want to purchase be bigger than that. So what else is important to you? Are you getting married? Are you unfortunately maybe getting a divorce? Are you downsizing? Have all your children moved out? Or are you just in a place where you no longer want to have a large space and you want to downsize? Why are you moving? That is the thing that you want to consider, because sometimes in the process you have twists and turns, but that why never changes unless something just abruptly changes in your life while you're unfortunately shopping for a home. So make sure you have a strong enough why. And if you know it's something that you are ready to do, I work with a lot of first time home buyers. If you know that's something that you really, really desire to have, then there's a few other things that we're going to talk about that you want to consider. One thing I will say to my first time home buyers is that if you're paying rent right now, you're not building equity. So as you're, definitely concerned about interest rates, you aren't building equity renting. And in a lot of places, rent is becoming even more expensive than just what your monthly payment would be. So that is another thing to really consider. And one thing which you may have already heard before is date the rate and marry the house. So what that means is that even though interest rates may be a little bit higher than where they were when you were looking maybe 2 years ago, or you're concerned about, something else rising with the rates, is that you can always refinance later. And that's a conversation that you can have with the lender. So make sure, again, that it's the house that you're falling in love with and not the interest rate. Because once you close on that house, if you don't like where you live, you're going to be very unhappy every single time you pull in your driveway. And so, number 2 is going to be pre qualify yourself before you have a conversation with a lender if you're looking to finance. If you're looking to pay cash, then this particular statement that I'm going to make may not apply to you. If you're looking to apply for a mortgage, some buyers say, well, at what point in the process is it important to get pre approved? You want to get pre approved fairly early on. So, that is actually the first thing that I recommend my buyers do when they come to me and they say, I'm ready to purchase a house. Before we get in our cars and go look at anything, we need to make sure that we know where we should be looking and what your budget is. So, that's going to be the best way to figure that out. So, you want to talk with the lender, you want to get pre approved, but you want to pre qualify yourself first. And what I mean by that is that you want to sit down and look at your budget. If you've never created a budget, you want to look at your income. You want to look at your expenses and how much is going out and what is comfortable for you as far as a mortgage payment. Because even though the lender is going to tell you how much house you can afford, you may have a completely different feeling and outcome in regards to that. And once you do your budget for yourself, the lender may say you can afford a $5,000 mortgage payment. But when you do your budget, you may only be comfortable with a $3,000 mortgage payment. Whatever that number is, that's why you want to pre-qualify yourself. Sit down, look at your needs versus your wants, and then how much money you have to work with. Because another thing that you strongly want to consider is that, as a homeowner, you're going to have expenses. You may be able to afford the house as far as purchasing it up front, but can you pay the gas bill? Some of houses in some areas, you have lawn care. If you want to have somebody cut your grass, treat your grass, keep it nice and green, all of those things come along with home ownership. And then the maintenance piece. So if you were here and you're thinking about buying and you were listening to my spiel to the sellers, then that, maintenance that you have to do, getting the gutters clean, getting the house power washed, depending on the exterior, like all of these things that you want to consider. So pre-qualify yourself before you talk with the lender. Number 3 is, now it's time to talk with the lender. What is the lender going to ask you? They're going to ask you a few things, and they're also going to request some documents from you as well. So getting organized, want to go back to that. It's going to be really important. And you want to take time and do that now. Another thing to consider are life changes. It's very important. If you don't take anything else away from this conversation and you're thinking about buying, is that if you're thinking about getting a new job, if you're thinking about buying a car, if you're thinking about adding somebody else and signing as a co-signer on a piece of debt, a car, an apartment, you want to buy your kids something, strongly consider if that's worth purchasing your home. Because depending on how much that expense is, it could put you at a certain rate with your debt to income ratio that unqualifies you. So the things that a buyer should consider that a lender is going to look at, they're going to look at your income. How much do you have coming in every month? Are you employed? If you're not employed and you're on a fixed income, what does that look like? And so also your assets, how much have you saved? Your credit score. Generally speaking, your credit score needs to be above at least a 580. 580 credit score is more than likely gonna be the lowest, but you strongly want to consider being in the 600s, and ideally, depending on where you live, and we'll talk about down payment assistance programs as well. 640 would be more so ideal, but at least a 580 with conventional financing. And when I say conventional, I mean with certain type of financing. So it would definitely be FHA, but with FHA financing, a 580 could work, but you may have additional fees attached with that type of score. So that is something you really want to work on, having a strong credit score. And so, like I said, I would recommend at least over in the 600s, ideally at least a 640. And then you want to look at debt to income ratio. So back to that, co-signing, things like that. You strongly want to consider, your student loans if you have them, because that is considered in your debt to income ratio. Even if it's in deferment or you're not making payments, Most lenders are going to look at that and say, what would your monthly payment be if you had to make payments now? So the lender's also going to look at, so we've talked about income, assets, your credit score, debt to income ratio. We've talked about employment as well. So generally, if you're starting and stopping jobs, you're quitting jobs, that's going to be questionable. So they may ask for what we call a letter of explanation. So those are just some things you strongly want to consider. Getting your tax returns. If you haven't filed taxes, they're going to ask for the last 2 years of your tax returns generally. So this is all with getting pre-approved. Now, different lenders run their businesses different ways. But if you are looking for a great lender, they should be asking you for that information. And if they're not asking it for you from you up front, believe me, they're most likely going to ask for it later. And a great lender, like I said, would be wanting to look at that stuff up front, because you don't want to get your hopes up and then you can't move forward and you're not actually in a position to purchase. Those are things, if you provide that up front to a lender, they should be able to determine if you can be pre-approved and at what amount. And then number 4 is going to be realistic. First time purchasing a home, and it may not be your first time. Be realistic with what you can afford, and in the area you're shopping in, what that looks like. Every area is different. The average price point in Toledo is $150,000. In Michigan and the Wayne County area, it's closer to $200,000. So, and then depending on where you're shopping in the city, outside of certain cities, it gets more expensive. So be realistic with yourself. No home is perfect. In addition to that, when you get a new construction home, I've helped buyers buy new construction. New construction homes aren't perfect. No one is perfect. So nothing's going to be perfect. And that is why you want to consider in that process in saving is that there are going to be things that you're going to have to pay for outside of what we call the closing costs, that a lender may say your closing cost is $10,000. But you want to consider things such as private inspections, because homes aren't perfect. Having an inspector go through the home and look at the roof. If you are in an area with the basement, inspecting those crawl spaces, basements, things like that. And so those expenses are not a part of your closing costs. And that's why it's really important to save. And I would recommend saving as early as possible. But one thing I mentioned earlier were down payment assistance programs, and those are out there and available. So certain cities have different, and areas have down payment assistance programs where, as a buyer, they may help you with down payment assistance. And so you would want to talk to the local lender about that. And then, so number 4 is just be realistic. And number 5 is really consider the market. Depending on where you live or where you plan to live, we're seeing multiple offers again. As I mentioned at the beginning, it is a seller's market. So with multiple offers, if a house is move-in ready, your agent should be able to direct you in this area. And you want to come in to a multiple offer situation offering less than the list price. Those are things you really want to consider. Is that going to help you get the house, or are you just basically wasting your time? So again, be realistic, and then consider how long a home has been on the market. If you are starting to shop and you're interested in purchasing, go and just get in the car and drive around. There's open house and things out there. And so if you just want to get an idea of what the inside of a home looks like, then stop and go in the open house. You can also use Google Street View if you're moving out of state and you don't have a chance to go to a house in person right away. Go on Google Street View and look at the areas in the neighborhoods, and it will give you a great idea of what's going on. So those are my tips for my buyers. So those 5 things. Let your why be bigger than the interest rate is number 1. Pre-qualify yourself before you talk with the lender is number 2. And then number 3 is going to be the things that the lender would consider. Number 4 is be realistic. Be realistic with your goals, and then know that no home is perfect. And then number 5 is just really consider the market, where you plan to live. And I appreciate the time. Those are the tips. And then I'm going to open it up for Q&A. So Evangelist Roberson, if anybody has any questions, please feel free to share.
There was no questions at this time, but if our viewing audience have questions, feel free to put your questions in the chat. Um, I really did like all of the great tips that you mentioned, and the different quotes. Date, you said date the rate and buy the house. Uh, Elaborate on that.
So date the rate and marry the house. So just know that you can refinance. So when
Okay.
when interest rates go down, you want to talk with your mortgage lender, but that may be an option for you is to refinance. But if you really like the house, then you want to go ahead and move forward with it because it may not be around. And so that is where you really want to consider not getting so caught up in the interest rates, and especially if you are leasing, then you're not building equity anyway, so more than likely, in that scenario, just really consider how much you like the house versus what the interest rate is.
Okay, excuse the noise. Actually, I wasn't aware that we had a repair job that was scheduled this evening. So if you hear some noise in the background, uh, that was not planned today, but my husband planned that. So my apologies. So talk again about this is you said it was a seller's market. So that means if I really were thinking about selling my property, it could be to my advantage. How does that play out when it comes to, you said that means that there is a limited or not enough surplus out there in the field. Is that correct?
Yes, so for buyers there's more demand than there are homes available. So
So that
generally when
really,
we
so
oh,
if
what were you going to
someone was
say?
trying to upload or not, or I ain't gonna say upload or sell their property, if they have a second a rental home or something of that, it may be to their advantage because people are looking, even though the interest rate might be not so advantageous, but in the reference for the seller, it can work to our advantage because somebody's looking for housing.
Absolutely. People are looking for housing. And one thing that you want to consider, and when you think about that, when you're looking at a house online, it'll show you the days on market. So from the day that the house went on the market into the day that an offer is accepted, so it's under contract. If a house is going under contract the first 7 days, or you're seeing a house under contract in the first, 7 to 10 days, then you strongly want to consider that those particular areas are hot areas. You have a
Okay.
lot of interest with buyers. And so, with that, you always want to create that game plan. And that's
All
where I was
right.
mentioning, if it's multiple offers possibly on the table, you want to make sure that you are submitting your strongest offer if it's the house that you really, really want, because you have more demand. I'll say, for example, right now in the Toledo area with listings, some of them are getting like 10 to 14 offers. So those are
Wow.
some of the, we're there. And one thing that I would say is that in reference to the interest rate is that when you think about it, what we experienced during COVID, when the 2021, 2020, those are rates that, I mean, for a lot of us, at least, during my time, they weren't that low. And even when you consider when rates were 10% or 14%, is that when you put it all in perspective, the possibility that they're going to go back down to 3%, 4% is very unlikely. So when you put it in that type of perspective, the 6.75 or where rates are, and then depending on your interest rate and how much you want to put down, that's why you really want to make that why so much bigger than just that. And if you really like the house, pull out the big guns to make sure that you can get it. And of course, your agent can direct you on what that looks like.
You do have a question. Thank you for that really good answer. How much should a person have saved up for those potential extra expenses?
That is a great question. So, a very, very short snippet. So, when you think about purchasing a home, you will hear people talk about a down payment. Your down payment, which is usually, now in this scenario, we're not looking at anyone getting down payment assistance. This example is going to be just standard example with no down payment assistance. And when I say that, some programs or like cities are giving money away, we're not going to look at that because I don't want to confuse anybody. So, for the sake of this example, if you're looking to purchase a home, the lowest amount that you can have for down payment assistance, I'm sorry, for a down payment is put down is 3%. The conventional loan, 3%. Now, your down payment is 3% of the purchase price, and that is a part of your closing cost. So, other things that will be a part of closing costs, depending on the state in which you live in. Michigan and Ohio, they use title companies. Some states use closing attorneys. So, your closing attorney fees, your lender fees, which would also include your appraisal, those are, and your down payment are all under the umbrella of closing costs. Things outside of that that you want to have money for, which where this question comes in, is your private inspection if you choose to have one. That will vary from area to area, how much a private inspector costs. Generally, I would say if you're in Michigan or Ohio and you're getting a very basic inspection, you want to budget around $500. But it also depends on the square footage of the home. Now, there's another thing to consider, which is your earnest money deposit. We're looking at Michigan and Ohio. And you also want to consider your contract. When you're purchasing a home, it is a legally binding agreement. So you could put things in your legally binding agreement, which is considered the purchase agreement, that are not necessarily under the umbrella of what's required in a certain state. In certain areas, your earnest money, which is a good faith deposit, that is money that you pay usually earlier on in the process, and it's held in escrow. Now, that is money you want to have put aside. Now, it goes towards your closing costs and down payment generally, unless you laid out something different in your contract. So, depending on the amount, usually the lowest that I would recommend is like $1,000. So, I always say a good rule of thumb is around $2,000 to $3,000. But that is on a very 2 to 3 thousand on like $100,000 to $200,000 home. Now, again, these are very generic um, markers that I'll use. But if you're thinking about getting a private inspection, and depending on the area that the home is in, you may have a septic. There's just so many additional factors, and that's why you really want to talk with an agent. But 2 to 3 thousand, and that would be for other, additional things that need to be done. And sometimes people can gift you and cover some of that cost, right? So let's say someone wants to do something for you, but they're not giving you money towards your closing costs, but they can pay for your private inspection. So these are different ideas of ways that people can assist without giving you, big dollars towards your towards the purchase of the home, but it's still a very nice, generous gesture.
You have another question. Is the seller the one that accepts the offer?
The seller is the person that accepts the offer. And if you are, one thing you want to consider is, the seller accepts the offer, but there's different scenarios. So I'll take it a step further and say, who is on title? Is the house in a trust? Is it in some type of estate? So the seller may be the attorney or the trustee, or it may be just an individual that has, owns the property. And something that you want to strongly consider as well, which in the state of Ohio, it's a very old, it's called the dower law. It's very old, is that if you're married, and it doesn't matter if that spouse was there when you first purchased the home, whoever is your current spouse, when you get ready to sell, they have to sign off and they have interest in the sale of the property. So they are now kind of a decision maker, and they have to sign at the closing. So that's something that you strongly want to consider. I tell people, if you're getting married, or if you know you want to be married, or however that works out, if you're in Ohio, it's very old law, and most states do not have that in place. And that's why you want to consider, their seller is the one that accepts, but you have to look at who actually is authorized legally to make that decision. So it's the seller, but it could be the seller could be also working with an attorney, or, another party to help decide on which offer is best.
Uh, that's really helpful. That encourages our audience to take a look at some of those laws that relates to where they viewing from, because it vary in different states. Um, Another question: if someone is looking at purchasing a foreclosure, pros and cons with purchasing foreclosures.
That is a great question. So, with foreclosed properties, if you are looking at properties on what we call the multiple listing service, which is where real estate agents list properties for sale, and we're able to see listings on the market. So, with that, a lot of times the foreclosed properties will feed right through the MLS. So, and the MLS is short for the multiple listing service. So when you're looking at a property, if an agent is sending you a list of properties, or you're able to log into a portal and look at listings in your area, then for Michigan and Ohio, they funnel through the portal just like other properties. So it's generally a bank-owned property. That's what foreclosed properties are. The bank owns the property, and with the bank owning the property, know that for Michigan, for Ohio, the bank doesn't have to provide what we call property disclosures. So there's certain scenarios where when you get ready to purchase a property, the seller has to provide property disclosures, which will cover various things about the house, condition and the property, if there's water in the basement, this and that. Those are just examples. When the property is owned by the bank, they don't have to do that. In addition, when the property is owned by the bank, you can take all of the extra warm and fuzzy feelings out of it. It's all based on numbers. It's based on numbers. So it's going to be pretty much very clear cut. If you're working with a seller that owns their property, and it's, Big Mama's house, or, they've lived there for 30 years, then they're going to feel attached maybe, and warm and fuzzy, and they're listening in on the ring to see what you're talking about when you walk up to the house. The bank is not doing that. So it's going to really come down to dollars and cents. You will not have property disclosures. And in addition to that, some people like to go the route of, I'm going to go through the land bank and purchase my house, or I'm going to go through the city and purchase properties that are owned by the city. This is one piece of advice. If you do not, this is the second thing, if you do not remember anything else, please make sure that you have a title company in Ohio or in Michigan. If you're in a title company state, run a title search to make sure that the property is owned free and clear by the seller. I will say this until I'm blue in the face, is that if a property is acquired by a quick claim deed, there is no guarantee that that seller owns the property free and clear. Before you purchase a property for 10,000 because you're getting a deal, 20,000, and then you find out you're going to have to pay an attorney thousands of dollars to clear the title on the property, when you could have paid a title company a couple $100 to help you come to the conclusion that that needed to be done beforehand. That will save you a lot of time. So that's something to consider, because with foreclosed properties, depending on if they're foreclosed properly through the county and how all of that is recorded, that is a huge thing to consider. And that's with any property, not just foreclosed properties. People don't want to use title companies sometimes. They want to go around people and save money. You're not doing yourself any favors. So that's something that you're buying, if you're selling, it doesn't matter. If I'm listing a property for sale, I start pre-title, because I don't know. I let the title company do their job, and they determine something needs to be required, or if they need something from the seller, so that when we get an offer, they can accept it and we can close as soon as possible. But if you find all of these issues, some of those issues take months to clear. So, or like I mentioned, you may have to get an attorney involved. So just remember that with foreclosed properties, especially because it just depends.
Very good. Another question. When a person have maybe not been pre-approved or gone through that process, do you still record? Will agents still show them homes or work with them, or how do you handle that? Maybe it's their first time and they are not even aware that they should have a pre-approval.
That is a good question. So, should you what you don't have a pre-approval? Will agents show you properties? Different agents run their business differently. One thing that I will say is that I will not show a property without a pre-approval. Why? So, in the process of selling homes, there is no guarantee that a buyer, you can purchase the property, and it also can be very damaging as far as the with emotionally for a buyer. If you go through all of these different steps of going through the house, spending all that time, spending the agent's time, I'm going to be just very honest from an agent's perspective, because time is valuable, is that we don't know whether you can move forward or not. So if you want to look at homes and you don't want to have a pre-approval, then that's what the open house is for. So I would say it over and again. If you could, because I promise you, you have serial open house people who just take Saturdays and they take their weekend and they just go look at all the houses that they can get in without a pre-approval. So you strongly, as a buyer, if you're serious and you're motivated, and I tell everybody this, I've never had a buyer. I don't care if it takes a year or 2 years. I've never had a buyer that was serious and motivated that was not able to purchase a property. It may not have been when they wanted to purchase it, but they were able to purchase. So you have to follow the process. You have to make sure that you take time to talk with the lender, because if you're serious, you really need to know what to do, how much you need to have saved. And again, even after the lender tells you that, do your own due diligence and make sure you can truly afford to make that payment by making your own budget. Because
Very good.
the last thing you want to do is not be able to make that payment, afterwards. And that can be devastating.
Uh, in well, if you are in the purchasing market and looking at purchasing, and you've already had your credit report pulled or your information pulled, and you just mentioned, let's say I'm working with an agent and they say, well, hey, why don't you use the people that I'm working with? Why don't you use my finance company? Um, and maybe they have a relationship already with their own bank or their own mortgage company. Does that go against them if they switch over and start working with, me working with your financial institution? So that's one question. Then someone put in the chat, can a person assume your mortgage? So those are the two questions.
Okay. So I'll go with the short one first. Depending on the type of mortgage, so some mortgages are assumable. So whomever is holding that mortgage, so the seller that has that mortgage in place, they would want to contact their lender to find out if they have an assumable mortgage. I've seen some of those
Hmm.
scenarios, which are awesome, because if it's assumable and that rate is super low, then that's the benefit, right? So the lender
Wow.
can answer that question. The mortgage company can verify if that seller has an assumable mortgage where the buyer can come in and assume that mortgage. So they can answer that question. Now, for the other question, can you repeat that one? Because for some reason it just slipped
Uh,
my mind.
no, it can you, or is it recommended to switch financial institutions if an agent says, hey, I want you to uh, consider my financial institution, and maybe uh, they've already had their credit report pulled and concern about how this is going to impact their credit history?
Yeah. So if it's generally you can check with the lender, but if it's like within that 30-day period or so when you're getting your credit pulled and things like that, usually it doesn't affect your credit. Another thing that I would say as well is because I know sometimes buyers will say, well, I don't want to have my credit pulled at all because it's going to make my credit score drop. If your credit score is going to drop that low, that it's going to put you in an unqualified position, you shouldn't be purchasing just yet. You need to wait and let your build your credit up a little stronger. So that's my tip on that end.
Good.
Now, I will say all lenders are not created equal. And some they're not created equal. And when I was saying earlier about the things that a lender will ask for, income, assets, credit score, debt to income ratio, they're going to look at all that stuff, tax returns, is that some lenders look at that stuff earlier than others. And I will be very honest with you. There are certain lenders that if I see their name, the most important thing, there's two things that are really important is, can the lender close the deal? Certain lenders are really good for certain buyers situations. So some have really good programs for conventional buyers and they that are approved and they'll have some grant money. Other lenders have other programs available. So the first question I will be asking my real estate agent is, why do you want me to talk with your lender? And
Yes,
they
that's
can
a
answer
good
that
one.
question. So it may not be just because I have a relationship. I will tell you that the lenders that I work with, I know they can close the loan. And I've taken on some buyers that had their lenders and they didn't close it. And I will never work with another lender again if they can't close that loan that first time. Because what I will say is this, if it's due to financing, that should be discovered very early on in the process. And when I say that, I'm not referring to a buyer that decided to go and rack up their credit card with new furniture. That
Right.
is a whole nother conversation. But seriously consider the lender. And I will say this as well. You need to do a deep dive and see what type of feedback is out there and reviews on the lender post closing. Because after you close,
That's good.
some lenders will not work with you if you fall on hard times. Some lenders, are notorious for dropping the ball on stuff. And that may not be important to you today. And then your loans can be sold and all that kind of stuff. So that's another thing. But overall, really ask that agent, what is it that they can offer, or, why would you recommend that I do that? And really, really hear what they have to say. But overall, it may drop your score just a little bit if it's been a while, but usually after, depending on the lender, after 90, 4 months, 5 months, that lender is usually going to pull your credit again before closing. And they're going to make sure that it didn't go from a 740 to a 580. So just know that you have to make sure that you do your due diligence. But overall, it's a great question. But a lot of times, certain lenders, they're just not all created equal. And that's why usually some agents will recommend that you go with the ones that they have a relationship with if they know they can get that loan closed.
Very good. Now, you talked about conventional purchasing, and did I hear you say the minimum is 3%? I thought conventional was always 10 or sometime even 20%. Maybe where did I get that from?
So that used to be the case. So it used to be, you need 20% down to purchase a home. You do not need 20% down to purchase a home. However, if you want to avoid paying what we call
Okay.
private mortgage insurance, which is an insurance that you pay when you put down less than 20%. Some banks have certain programs, or lenders have certain programs available where you may not have to pay private mortgage insurance on a conventional loan if you put down less than 20%. If they have a program like that available, that's going to be directly a conversation that you have with that company, that mortgage company. But generally speaking, you can put down as low as 3% with conventional. However, the lender, and that's why you have to get pre approved, they're going to determine if that is the type of scenario that works for you. they're going to look, and all things considered will determine if 3%. You may be able to go conventional and you may have to put down 5%. Now, these are examples are for people purchasing a primary residence. Keep that in mind. If you're thinking about purchasing an investment property, then you can't use well, let me take a step back. If you're thinking about purchasing an investment property, you're most likely going to have to put down more, which may be more like 15, 20, 25% for investment property. But if it's your primary residence, the lender will walk you through based on your financial situation if 3% will work, but that is the lowest. Now, some down payment assistance programs may take it a step further and they may pay a portion of that 3% for you, where you may only have to put down 1%. The state of Michigan has a program like that where, they can do that. So, it's different programs available and out there that may cover that. Ohio, the money's gone now, but there were $20,000 grant programs available. And for some people, that covered all their closing costs. They didn't have to come to the table with anything. So just depending on where you live, different programs are out there. But that's, with conventional 3% in FHA, the lowest you can put down is 3.5%.
Okay, we have another question. What are some ways buyers can be good clients, especially when they don't know the do's and the don'ts of real estate business?
So the way that buyers can be good clients, so you mean good clients to their agent if they're working with an agent?
Probably to their agent,
Okay.
I'm assuming.
Yes. Okay. So with working with the agent, I would say this. The first thing is really going to be you have at some point you got to trust your agent. If you don't trust the agent you're working with, if you don't think that they're doing a good job and you don't really feel that type of relationship is there where you can trust what they're doing, you really need to have a conversation with them or a conversation with their broker. Because if you've signed some type of agreement to work with that agent for a certain amount of time, then that requires you should have some type of conversation. I would recommend that. Sometimes their personalities just don't match, right? And so the way that number one is really being honest with them and trying to share exactly what it is you're looking for, but being realistic is going to be really huge. If you're on a tight budget, you can't afford to be really picky, and so if you know that you're trying to buy a house and you have $150,000 and the average price point is 150, so that means it's a lot of other buyers probably shopping in that same price point. Let's say if you're in Toledo, then you really have to be realistic with what you can purchase at that price point with what you have. And if that doesn't work for you and you know that you absolutely despise what you can afford, then you should wait. And that's going to make you the best kind of buyer for your agent, because the last thing an agent wants to do is get in their car and drive around and continue to show properties and the clients don't want to listen. So if you trust your agent, you want to listen to, and don't ever be afraid to say and ask more questions, right? Don't assume, like, if you don't understand the process and you need a little bit more clarity, you can Google and things like that, but listening to different podcasts out there, different platforms, and really making sure that you're realistic, you're open to listening, and then in addition to that, you're gonna have to really follow, like, just know that generally there's gonna be some twists and turns. So you want to just take a step back as much as possible. When you're buying your home for the first time, it can be emotional. Some people can be emotional. Is that, like, you have to understand, and I always say this, at least, if it's for you, then it's going to be there. If you putting your best foot forward and it's like you're just getting beat out and you feel so discouraged, I encourage you to really, and this is where that faith piece is, like, God's timing is always right. I mean, my story was just absolutely insane how I got my house, and I was like homeless. It's crazy. I'll say that, because I was living in an apartment and we discovered some mold basically in my apartment. That's what happened. And I had it on a vision board what I wanted, and I was selling real estate, but I knew, what I wanted. And then I find this mold, and all of a sudden I'm like, I can't stay here. And we're living in a hotel, and we're in a hotel for a short period of time. And immediately is like, okay, we got to buy a house now. But when I tell you God ordained, like he worked everything out. And I can't make up when I looked at my vision board and I'm like, my house met almost everything on my vision board. And I'm like, God will do it in his timing. So if you make sure that you handle, your first fruits, you're taking care of your responsibilities, you're managing your finances, you're saving your money, you're doing the necessary things that when your blessing is there and you may not even be thinking about it, he's going to open the door and make sure everything else falls in place. And so that's just my spiel. I didn't even mean to say all of that, but just be encouraged because his timing is the right timing. So the best way to be the best client is to be open, to listen. In addition to that, if you are a person of faith, then ask God to direct your steps and he will connect you with the right people.
That is so good that you shared your testimony, because this is what it's all about. We're passing on, and that was for whoever that was for. I'm sure it was for someone to hear that God will set you up. And it was time for you to be in to elevate your lifestyle. So I'll leave it at that. This has been great. We've had great questions. And Tiffany, is there anything else you want to share before you let this audience go? I will put your information back up so that people can um, get in touch with you if they have questions. Um, Let me do that now. So if there's anyone that still have questions, you certainly can feel free to reach out to Tiffany. And she did a phenomenal job. I mean, I can continue to ask my own questions because this is what an area that I love just be knowledgeable about. And and maybe I'll just ask this question just as people are always thinking about maybe selling their house, looking for more, or downsizing. And you talked about preparing your house. I really uh like that, and I think that's such a good recommendation. Sometimes people do not take care of their homes like they should, and then it's time to sell and you got to go and do all this work. But so let's say it's a little bit outdated now. Let's say most time we are not putting up wallpaper, and you got this bathroom that is wallpapered, and you think I love it. At the time 15 years ago, it was great. And you're thinking about selling your home, or you have a tile that is really outdated, or even multiple colors throughout the house. Talk about that. Do you just let it go and say I will take concessions if people, it's a beautiful home but you haven't kept up with the trends, and so what do you do in that instance?
So in that instance, the first thing is what are you like, how much are you trying to net from the sale? So one thing I said was
Good
a house will sell
question.
at any price. You may not want to do any work. You may say, I don't care what it looks like, I don't care what needs to be done. That house will sell at the right price if it's not like, material things, right? Like the whole foundation is sinking. That kind of stuff's different. But like cosmetic things or things like that, it's like, what price? Now, if you are saying, I want top dollar for my home, that's where you want to consider some of those labor intensive things. If your house has wallpaper throughout, that can be labor intensive, removing some of that wallpaper, doing all of those things. So remember, one thing is that what it'll cost you to do it as the seller, if the buyer walks in the door, you can double or triple it, And in addition
Wow.
to that, depending on the area, it can be very hard to get contractors out as a buyer to get all these quotes. And so some buyers may say, I don't want to deal with it, and a paint job goes a long way. If you don't want to do anything else and you have some areas and rooms If it's a dark room and it's a really small room, light colors will make the room brighter. It'll make it bigger. It'll appear to be bigger, even though it could be smaller. And so those are things you want to consider as first, what is your plan? And if money is important to you and you want to get top dollar, then you do want to consider maybe making some small adjustments if your budget can afford, and you have space to at least paint, the flooring and things like that. Those certain things, they become important factors. And I also say, like I mentioned, security items are really a big deal. And then safety things, right? Make sure that your banisters are stable, that your railing is stable, things like that, because you don't want to distract somebody from, something's not working right and they get in your house and they fall, or, they're going up the steps and they feel like, that wooden plank needs to be fixed and it feels like they're about to fall through the floor and the floor is going to give. That's distracting. Or I'll take it a step further. So I showed this house. It was beautiful, but the house had a very foul smell. I mean, it was foul. And we just walked out. We just walked out. It was nothing else to say. It was nothing else to do. If don't fry fish, don't fry perch before you're about to have people, viewing your beautiful home. And some of these things may seem kind of small, but air the house out, keep the smell neutral. You're not walking into Bath and Body Works. So, just keep it real light and you'll be surprised, but some of these things can be distracting when people are looking at the house. So just keep that in mind as well, along with the appearance.
Thank you so much. I think we're out of time and questions. All the questions have been answered. I don't think there's any more questions that we have at this time. But you have done a phenomenal job. And I want to thank our audience for staying with us and sharing this video. Please share with someone that you know that is thinking and talking about selling or purchasing. And you have our agent name and number. She's willing to volunteer her information that she shared if there's additional questions. But I want to bring your attention to you think this is awesome to know. This relates to our spiritual walk. And I thank God for having women that are willing to pass on this knowledge. Next Thursday, our entrepreneur, attorney Barbara Littles, is coming to talk about the keys and essentials of ownership, as well as being a entrepreneur, and she's skilled at it, and she has the knowledge to help prepare people that are business owners. And then we have at the end of the month, on the 28th, the attorney Gwendolyn Cook Jones is coming to talk about the keys to estate planning and wills. We need to get our business in order, even as we think about our properties. But in terms of leaving here, let us get our things in order. On next Sunday, I really want you to make sure you come back to hear the tongue of the wise. And I say hear the tongue of the wise because these two women have age under their belt and they are going. I tell you, when I started talking with them, I said, people do not have to repeat mistakes over and over again, keep knocking your head. And they had some mistakes and got out of the will of the Lord, but they are women of faith and women of virtue, and they have a story to tell and some keys they're passing on from lessons learned in life. And on Sunday the 24th, now financial planning, people, this lady comes prepared from the heart of Detroit, but she lives out east now, Danielle Bird Thompson, and highly sought after financial advisor. And she's coming to talk about building and creating wealth. I mean, even starting at the age of 3, getting your children on board to saving money. Now, if you take heed to Danielle Bird Thompson, I'm telling you, you will be prepared to buy your first home at the age of 18 when you leave your parents' house, because she's teaching her own children how to prepare for wealth, generational wealth. And so I want you to stay with us this month. I know that you've been blessed by Tiffany. You want to sow a seed to this ministry. That's DJ Roberson ministry at Cash App or by email. Be a blessing. I tell you, I love just being a blessing to our guests by saying, hey, go to lunch, or just, hey, do something for yourself. And so, won't you be a blessing to this ministry? And that information I'll put back on the screen. But I definitely want you to come Sunday. Let me put the flyer out if you haven't seen it yet. Please feel free to share and to prepare for this coming Sunday. We have, let me put the flyer up. Well, yes, here it is. So this is our two speakers for Sunday, the tongue of the wise. And I tell you, these ladies, they're going to set you on fire. That's all I got to say. They will set you on fire by the end of their conversation. They are truly going to be transparent, and share to our women. Thank you all for being with us on tonight, and to our guests. Tiffany, would you like to close with a word of prayer? I'm certainly know that that's appropriate. Why don't you close with the word of prayer?
Absolutely. God, we thank you for this evening. I just especially thank you for Evangelist Roberson, for her family, for the blessing that she is in spreading the gospel and also encouraging and educating all of those, Lord, out there. And we just thank you. We ask that you move and continue to build up her ministry, continue, Lord, to sustain her right now, God. And all of those that are watching, all of those that are going to watch the replay that are really seeking to take the next steps in homeownership or in other areas of their lives, oh God, that you would direct their footsteps. And we thank you. We thank you for your faithfulness. And we just thank you for all things on today, that you continue to help us, Lord, that we can make wise decisions. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. That's why it's called the dwelling place. Because in the book of Judges, the people came unto Deborah to inquire of her wisdom. And this is what the Lord has given me to do. It is my assignment to bring to you where women and men meet wisdom and
Amen.
resources are shared. And you've heard the great resource of Tiffany Jones on tonight. I don't have that knowledge, but God gifted her for a time such as this to share her knowledge and wisdom to us, and it was free. Now, all you need to do is take advantage of it and go forth. Even if you say, I don't think I'm in the right position this year to purchase, but you can get things in order. And that starts with meeting with your financial institution to see where you need to tighten up so that you can qualify for that great first home or dream home. So we hope that you've been blessed tonight. Thank you. We look forward for you coming back on Thursday and this coming Sunday as we continue with women passing it on. God bless each of you. I'm going to end at this time, and Tiffany, stay with us.